Before we get into calculating values related to discounts, markup, and sales tax, we first want to review the process for converting between percent and decimal values. We can start off with a pretty obvious statement, which is that 25 and 0.25 are very clearly not equal to one another. However, if we update that expression slightly and put a percent sign after 25, now we have 25%, which is exactly equal to 0.25. We need to understand that relationship between a percent and a decimal and be able to move back and forth between those, because while when we speak about different values, interest rates, markup percentages, sales tax, we talk about things in terms of percent. Performing our mathematical operations is going to be a lot easier using decimal values. Fortunately, converting back and forth is pretty straightforward. If we add a 0.0, a 0.0 onto our 25%, then we can demonstrate the process for converting that into a decimal by simply moving that decimal place to the left 2 places, giving us a new value of 0.25. Really what we did there is divided that 25 by 100, so we can think of that mathematically or visually just moving the decimal place. If we start off with a decimal value, like 0.25, to convert that into a percent, we move the decimal place 2 places, but in the opposite direction, giving us that 25%. In this case, what we're doing mathematically is multiplying by 100, but again, we can think of that visually as just moving that decimal place 2 spaces. To get some practice with this, we'll convert some numbers, first decimals into percents. Since we're converting to percents, we'll multiply each of these by 100, or think about moving that decimal point 2 places to give us 0.63 is equal to 63%. 0.015 is going to be equal to 1.5%. For part C, we have 0.7. We can move the decimal place once, and then maybe we can see very clearly what's about to happen. But if we need it, what's helpful is to put in a placeholder 0. We can always add more zeros after a decimal point to see that we would move that decimal place a second time and end up with 70%. Similarly, with 3.4, we can add an extra 0, which will allow us to move that decimal place 2 spaces, leaving us with 340%. To do this the opposite direction, now we want to convert percents into decimals. Starting with 91%, we can move that decimal place once, twice, which again means we're dividing by 100, which will give us 0.91. In B, we'll move that decimal place again 2 places to give us 0.764. In part C, we'll move that decimal place once, and then we're out of digits. Even though it's kind of a meaningless statement, we could write this number as 0.5%, so we can do that as a placeholder, just to see that we would move that decimal place one more time to get 0.05. And then for 212%, again, we would move that decimal place twice to get a decimal value of 2.12. Again, we can always think of this as just moving a decimal place, but if we want that mathematical operation, what we're doing to convert a decimal into a percent is multiplying by 100, and to convert a percent into a decimal, then we're dividing that value by 100.